What's up, everybody? Coast to Coast podcast from InsideCarolina.com. I am your host, Joey Powell. With me, as always, Sherelle McMillan, Sean Moran, the two guys with the news that you can use. We are your favorite podcast, and we're brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt. Fellas, since the last time we talked, we figured we would do a special show this time. Not an emergency show, but a special show nonetheless, in a sense that we threw the teaser and the bait out for our subscribers on the Inside Carolina premium message boards that we would take their questions on this here episode. And there's been a lot of quiet after a really feverish couple of weeks for North Carolina with players coming and going. For the most part, things have quietened down now as the transfer portal closes here, upcoming on April the 22nd. Is that right, Cheryl? Yeah, so the portal is going to close here on April 22nd, which is very soon. North Carolina has seemingly kind of stepped away, taken a back seat, allowed things to chill and settle a little bit. And the roster seems to be somewhat steady at the moment. Notice I didn't say complete, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But what we figured we would do is, since there's been so much consternation and questions about not only players leaving, but players coming in, and some fans seem to be still assuming that North Carolina's roster is complete. And I don't know how many times that Sherelle and Ben can say that it's not complete. Just, pay attention. We're going to take some of your questions tonight. And so shout out to everybody who put questions on. I think we almost had 4 full pages of questions from folks. The good ones that we're able to answer, we're going to try to approach. And if we didn't read your question, it's nothing personal. Well, I don't know. It may be personal from Sean to you, but it's not personal from me to you. And we will try to deal with all the best questions as best as we're able. And folks, I would like to caveat to begin with, there are some things that we haven't been given clearance to comment on. Clearance. But to the extent that we can, and the extent that we can do so without jeopardizing any sources or anything like that, we're going to try to address those. So we're glad you're here. Buckle up. Hope that you enjoy this show. And maybe if it goes pretty well and we get some good reviews, we'll try to do this a little bit more often as we go through the summer. Additionally, we have new audio. You guys may have noticed a couple of weeks ago, I piloted my new audio. Oh, nope, no free reads. My new microphone and headphone system, and it seemed to get some decent reviews from y'all. I think it seemed to fix a lot of tech issues we're dealing with. So now Sean and Sherelle are on board as well with new mics. So we'll hopefully be taking care of all the audio issues that past plagued us. Hopefully you guys can let us know yes or no either way. Let's get rolling, boys, shall we? I'm going to go with no particular order on these questions, folks. Hopefully they will be relatively easy to understand. And if I mess up your question, please forgive me. I had to try to clean some of them up so that they'd be easier for us to toss back and forth with Sean and Sherelle and myself. First question. And Sherelle, I'm going to go with you because it's a bit of a recruiting question from our guy, CD. Our guy, we've already Corey Alexandered our first question from CD1410. Does the staff have the negative development reputation within the industry that is being discussed regularly on the boards?
Starting off hot. I feel like DJ Mike Tech at Foxy 99, the big stick.
Shout
Trying
out
not to
to
talk
Blakey, Gilbert Bays, all of our folks at Foxy 99.
Try not to talk into the microphone directly, but I hope the audio issues are clear. Yeah, I would say that the results of some of their freshmen have yielded some negative comments or feedback about their ability to develop players. And that's not really something new, I would say, to this staff. I think even Roy Williams, for better or worse, or whether you believe it or not, it plagued him some as well because he was very... he liked knowing who was around his players at all times. Let's put it that way. And I think in this day and age, that's not really something that can be done at a high major school because guys always are wanting to be in the gym. They're always wanting to work. And, you can only have so many NCAA mandated practices and sessions with the assistant coaches and all that. So to answer your question, I think we do hear that some, whether it's earned or not, whether it's, player specific or whether, the player has some responsibility, kind of have to leave that up in the air because we don't know the exact amount of like how often player X is working and how often player X is not working. But there is, I would say, somewhat of a negative feel for their ability to develop. And like I said, it's not just for Hubert Davis' staff; it goes back to Roy Williams' staff as well.
Do you feel like that's something that could be fixed? Do you feel like it's something that, with if UNC gets, all of a sudden, a really good one and done situation, or if North Carolina has a couple of guys that can turn themselves into multi-year league players, is that something that can be fixed with one class, or is it going to take, or is it just going to be something they fight with all the time?
Yeah, I don't mean to be Greg Barnes, but it's a messaging problem. I don't. Yes, there have been some players who have not developed the way that they probably should, but there are players who have developed in the way that they should, and maybe even better. And that message just isn't getting out. It's not getting across to who needs to hear it. And part of that is because of some of the insular nature of North Carolina, especially under Hubert Davis, because that is his personality. So I don't know that it's an issue of like true true like development issues as far as it relates to recruits. Like recruits are going to believe what they're going to believe because they think they're the best thing ever, and whatever happens doesn't apply to them. It's more of an issue with media folks, I think, with people within the basketball community, so they can say, "Hey, look at Sean Moran. When he came in, he was averaging 3 points a game. By the time he was a senior, freshman, he was 3 points a game, 15% from three. By the time he's a senior, he's 15 points a game and he's 40% from three. That's development. But that message just doesn't get shared as much as, pick your freshman who maybe didn't play the way that people thought they should. It doesn't play as well. And so it's a messaging issue. They just have to, I think, message some of their successes as much as their failures are magnified by folks on the outside.
And I think from successes, Harrison Ingram, in terms of his development in his 1 year in Chapel Hill, and where he started coming off of his Stanford seasons and where he ended up in terms of how well he played. But I think from a development perspective, so much is put on the 5-star freshman and what goes into the NBA draft, which is obviously an area that UNC has been lacking. You have Kobe White, et cetera. You have some small success cases in that instance, but just looking at the most recent class, which had been built up, across the board from Drake Powell and Ian Jackson, as well as Elliot Cadeau, and the fact that they've either transferred out or are on the fence about going into the NBA is where we're currently at. So I think it does take a Caleb Wilson having a strong season from that younger freshman perspective to change and alter that that perception.
And he'll certainly have that opportunity next year, considering what North Carolina's roster looks like and all the expectations that have been around Caleb Wilson until this point. Sherelle, another follow-up from DMAC2432. Do you think the transfer of Ian Jackson hurts the chances of landing a 5-star talent in the 2026 class?
I don't mean to not answer the question, but it doesn't matter for this particular staff, to be honest, because it's a 1 year deal. I think everybody around the program recognizes that. I think recruits probably recognize that as well. So I don't think it hurts them because they're more focused on the 2025 class because frankly, it could be their last at UNC. What could happen is that a good 2025 could help them. But again, I don't know that Ian Jackson particularly hurts because these recruits, man, they love their games. They're very confident. And the next guy is always going to say, well, the last guy was the problem. I'm not the problem. Or, Hubert Davis isn't the problem, or whatever the problem was. It has nothing to do with me. I'm going to come in, be the guy, and move on. So I don't think it hurts them, but I also think it's not a particularly important question because of how much recruiting is moving to the transfer portal, how much the staff is investing in the 2025-2026 season. It's more about survival, honestly, than it is kind of, I would say, forward looking at this point. It is, whatever cliche you want to use, but it really is all in on next season to get the best result. And then as maybe the warmness of the seat calms down, if it does, then you start to reapproach 2026 with a renewed focus and vigor that maybe you had a year ago.
Although if there is that calming of the seat, that is a case study that now doesn't exist for a guy that, I think for the most part exceeded expectations as a freshman, hitting close to 40%, having those 20-point games, Obviously, there was the fallout at the end of not getting minutes. So to me, it is a missed case study or missed example of when they are talking to these top freshmen in that 26 class or 27, that doesn't exist. But I do recognize the larger point is what type of money do you play, and is there a role for me going forward?
And again, I think that goes to your point, Sean. It goes back to messaging. Like he had one of the best three best seasons from three that a Carolina freshman's ever had. I think he scored 20 points or more 8 times, which is like third most this century. So he had, by all accounts, like from a scoring perspective, a really good season. Other stuff, yeah, could have been better, but that's still, you have to message that and say, okay, maybe he didn't get drafted where he wanted to and he had to go to the portal, but look at this class of 2024. How many of the guys who really thought they were going to get drafted in the first round got drafted? And then you have to say, okay, so look at that number. And of those guys who are still staying in school and transferring, how many had seasons as good as Ian Jackson? So there's a way to just the fact that it's viewed as a failure, I think, is the whole issue, because there were some failures for Ian Jackson, but his season was not a failure. He had a pretty solid season. It just wasn't what everyone expected. So that's where it goes back to, for me, to messaging.
Yeah, good context. I appreciate that. Moving on to our next question from Jacob Wintink. If I butcher your names, guys, forgive me. I'm just going off of the way they're typed. Portal grades thus far, A through F. I'm going to throw this to you, Sean. And what's a realistic move they can do to bump the grade up? So I'm going to assume, and I'm going to put some words in Jacob's mouth here, but I'm going to assume he means whatever grade you give them, what's something that you think they could add without, naming any specific player? What's a skill that you think they could add that would take that up a whole grade level?
A very, very tough question, because I think there's a lot of ways you can go with this in terms of the overall. I mean, there's the overall portal season, then there's who they've brought in, and in my mind, right now I have it as a general B, knowing that they didn't get caught flat-footed like they did last year. They were able to get a very high-ranked big man, which was a focus. They were able to add some shooting with Powell, a depth piece, and Stevenson, and then Evans from a point guard combo position. So they added 4, which is not easy. There's a lot of other teams still looking for premium pieces. Sherelle posted the CBS article talking about the $10 million plus club. So they spent a lot of money. So that's a plus. But I think you're still wanting more from it, knowing what departed and what some of the deficiencies slash probably a higher volume of players at the front court than on the wing and the back court. So one, in terms of bumping the overall portal up, is obviously Drake coming back, or if he's not coming back, trying to land a premier wing, in my opinion. But also from a secondary perspective, still trying to add some guard depth from a potential combo guard, I'd say. Now, I think how it's laid out right now, they're paying money to Dixon. He is one of their top recruits, first team All-Met, Washington Post, et cetera, et cetera. So right now the expectation is that he is going to play off the bench, and that he's going to have to produce, which I don't think is a far expectation. But there's still some holes missing for that ideal team to get into a minus or B plus, A minus A type rating for me.
All right, Sherelle, I'm going to take some of your famous words that you've had to regurgitate again and again on the message boards recently. But this is from Tar Heel Basketball 2010. Now that all major, air quotes, additions are complete, can you talk about Tanner and Hubert's strategy moving forward? I think folks are curious a little bit about, was North Carolina done in the portal? And you've been very, very, as always, cautious with your word choice, and you've been very explicit. And I think some folks just, for whatever reason, are struggling to pick up what you're putting down. But I'm going to ask you again, if you might be able to speak to a little bit of, considering that the major work is done, what might be Tanner and Davis's process moving forward, as best that you're able to elaborate.
Yeah, I think it's still TBD, honestly, because think about this: Jim Tanner has not been on the job for 2 months, so he was hired on February 28th, and it's Easter weekend, so it hasn't quite been a full 2 months. The job when he got hired, pretty much it was meet with the coach, excuse me, meet with Hubert Davis, meet with some important people in the athletic department, and work on the portal. And that's been job number 1 through 5 since he started. So I don't think they've even had a bunch of time, to be honest, to really map out, okay, what exactly are we looking for? What exactly does this look like? We reported a couple of weeks ago, basically, that uh, Tanner was working with Buzz Peterson and then TJ Beisner, who used to run the Secondary Break Club, which was Carolina's collective. Those three, along with Eric Hoots, Carolina's director of player personnel, is what our sources said have kind of been like the brain trust as far as the recruiting board and making contacts and just kind of helping Tanner out. So I think that's been the focus since he got the job. And so I don't even think they have a real standard way of working, a standard, this is what UNC is looking for, a standard, this is how we're going to contact agents, all that stuff, I think is still in process because just with the way the portal works and with how much work they had to do in the portal, they had to jump on it. They had to go to it 100%. And that's why you haven't seen, any staff announced. You haven't seen any additional hires from Tanner or anything like that because they were 100% focused on the portal from the time he got the job. And, people kind of close to them have pretty much said his job is to help Hubert Davis do whatever it takes to win. And the first step in that was attacking the portal. So, not quite answering your question, but I don't think there is an answer to your question. Is the answer?
All right, hang on one second, Sean. I got something else I want to follow up Sherelle with since he led us there. Sherelle, from Blue 77, are we meaning North Carolina, planning to increase the size of the support staff? Obviously, there is some plans there. We've reported that at Inside Carolina. You've shared with it before, kind of what your sources are telling you. Obviously, that's still a thing, and it sounds like the timeline is probably sooner rather than later. But what else could you say about that specific question around support staff?
Yeah, not much. Pretty much what was in the release from UNC when he got hired on February 28th was that he was going to have a staff that he was going to work with as far as analytics, as far as player development, and a few other things. And he's going to build out that staff, I would say, in the coming weeks and months. But again, there was no time for that. When you get hired less than a month before the portal opens, you have to go 100% on the portal. For example, NBA agents, when they are working up with someone who's about to enter free agency, they'll start that work the previous October or November for July 1st free agency, when I think they call it the legal tampering season begins. And Tanner was hired about 28 days before the portal started. And again, the portal is college basketball free agency, except everyone's a free agent every year. There's 360 some teams in Division One times 13. So that's how many free agents there are in college basketball. Whereas in NBA, there's 30 times 15. So we're talking about a huge number of people and a huge just amount of knowledge he had to kind of uh, learn over a course of a short amount of time. So there's no time to hire folks. He had to jump in along with Davis and his group immediately to the portal.
So, just going back to Sherelle's initial comment, I think there are some similarities to be seen from at least the most recent high school class, in my opinion. One of getting that elite player in Vasar from a big perspective to Caleb Wilson, and then almost dropping down a little bit. They proved that at least right now they wanted to move quick. I'm not saying they haven't moved quick earlier, had focuses from Manic to Ingram, Cormac, etc. But obviously, judging it from last year, there were Vasar, and then almost that second tier where Evans, right? He's looking at Minnesota, some other schools. So it was almost focusing on these lower tier guys that they, from their prestige, from their budget, they are able to grab, almost like a Derek Dixon, versus trying to get into a larger bidding war with a Xavier Lee where we knew a lot of teams and some of the elite teams would be in on those players. So at least to me, once again, I think the main thing was reacting quickly and decisively and getting players. But it also seemed, hey, outside of one or two focuses, we're not going to try to get into that drawn out bidding war with a Alabama, Duke. Just put those few teams in that upper echelon to a certain extent, and then obviously Stevenson has that local tie, which I think they've used in the past as well.
It's interesting to me because I think the class really is a lot of upside, but a lot of risk. And I think we said it before, like upside can either get you fired or get you a contract extension. It just that kind of depends on what that upside does. But if you're when you're having to add four guys and UNC does have some of the questions that we talked about before. I think that plays into the situation. Then you kind of have to, like Sean said, you have to strategically say, okay, what is the biggest priority? And I think obviously the biggest priority was getting a big man, a true big. And then from there, with the point guard market, it was interesting because they were looking at a lot of guys and talked to a lot of guys. And Nate George, who eventually committed to Syracuse from Georgia Tech, he kind of convinced them. He wasn't at the top of their board or anything, but he kind of convinced them, like, hey, at this price and with these conditions, I think I can be your guy. I can come in and I can help and I can distribute. And while they weren't looking for a 1-to-1 from Elliot Cadeau, the fact that that George is such a good passer, I think intrigued him, and he kind of talked them into it a little bit. And then within 24 hours, it's a switcheroo, and they kind of have to reset. And to their credit, the reset this year was much quicker than the reset last year. If you remember, after Cliff Amori and Jonas Adu and others went elsewhere, they kind of took a break and said, okay, the three that they were looking at was Ugano Yinso, Coleman Hawkins, and Vinal Lubin. And they were like, the first one to take it, and people thought it was crazy, but the first one to take it is who they're going to go with. And this year, instead of doing that, they just kind of worked behind the scenes, and they didn't have to have a 1-for-1, the same person with the same traits as George and the same traits as Cadeau. They went kind of in a completely different direction and said, okay, how can North Carolina still make this position a plus? What's out there that isn't a facsimile of what they had, but is still good. And so they came up with this idea of Evans, and he wants to be a lead guard. It's part of his growth. He's got 2 years left. I know that doesn't mean a ton for folks, but he's got 2 years to develop. And they made a big bet on him because they could have waited on someone like Xavier Lee or some of these other guys to enter. But I think they learned a lesson to, if there's a guy that you like, go get him, figure out the rest later. There are no perfect players. There's no flawless team. So you have to kind of live with some of the warts, but you also get to live with the strengths. And Evans, for example, has a bunch of strengths, although he's never played lead guard, permanently or at the college level. So I think that's the kind of the trade they made in order to make sure that they got solid players. They had to attack quickly, whereas last year they were kind of going for home runs. And when you swing hard, sometimes you make contact and it goes out the park, and sometimes you whiff, and then you have to wait to your next at bat. But this time they just, they stayed there, and they were able to get, I think, very solid players. And people can question that strategy if they want, but I think it is a direct. It's directly related to how last year went, and so they found kind of a middle ground between waiting too long and kind of moving too quickly.
It's kind of like parenting in that sense, where, however you raise your kids is usually you try to go 180 degrees from what your parents did that you either liked or didn't like. And North Carolina has essentially done that this past year. Like Sherelle said, it's almost a direct correlation to fix what the issues were last year. I think it's been fun to see all the different opinions of, of fans and subscribers since the portal's open. You have some people that absolutely think that every single player North Carolina got is amazing. You have some to, who might think that every single player North Carolina got is underwhelming. You have some that think that North Carolina should be more strategic. You have some that think North Carolina should be quicker, all that stuff. And everybody's kind of right. Like I'm not poo pooing any thought. It's just crazy to see that different amalgam of so many thoughts and insights.
Well, Joey,
Next,
it's because it's very easy to see a scenario where North Carolina is not good next year because they don't have enough facilitating, they don't have enough shooting, the wing depth isn't great, and maybe some of the players they were hoping would take a leap don't. So it's that's not a shocking scenario, but at the same time, it's very easy to say, well, Trimble's always gotten better, and this is Evans' first time in a full-time point guard role. He can do it. And this is Vasar's first time as a full-time starter. He can do it. And Jonathan Powell started a lot of games. He can do it. And Stevenson's brand new. So, he can do it. And if Drake comes back, Drake can be one of the leaders along with Trimble. So you can talk yourself into, I think, both sides. And I agree with you. I don't think anybody's wrong. It's fascinating that heading into, kind of a make or break season that they're still even now there's variance on what could happen. They could be a number 3 seed, or they could be on the bubble again, and we can be talking about wins above bubble again, or they could have a great year. It just is fascinating.
if you don't Hirsch, I'm going to lose my mind with you using these stats even as we're in the off season. Next question I'll throw out here. This is from Dudley B on the message boards. Is Rusty still in the Navy? Actually, I'll take this one. Well, Dudley B, you'd mean Russell Sr., who is Rusty. That's the one that Ann Bethany is asking about. Sadly, he died in the Navy while saving his first mate, Edward Johnson, who's known as Eddie. Eddie sustained a severe head injury from the ordeal and needed a metal plate put in his head. Later, it was replaced with plastic. Eddie met Catherine Smith down at the VA when he was recovering, and they started dating. Catherine initially wanted to track down the family of the man who saved Eddie, so she tracked down her cousin Ellen to come with her. Catherine and Ellen tracked down the surviving family of Rusty Sr., who was responsible for saving Eddie, and found the Griswold family, and then Ellen fell in love with Clark Jr. I hope that was helpful. Good question from @Dudley B.
I thought that was a Johnny T-shirt read. I was confused there for a second, and then I caught
Nah,
it.
bro. I don't know what would make you think that. Sean, this question is for you from Digital Shade. Can Kyan Evans be a facilitator that makes the other guys better offensively? And so, again, Sherelle just kind of caveated that North Carolina brought him in because he wants to be a lead guard. So, Sean, can he be that facilitator even if he's not a true, air quotes, point guard?
So he's not going to be what we just saw for 2 seasons, Elliot Cadeau, in terms of the 35% plus assist rate, the ability to throw kind of jaw-dropping passes. So I think that is out of the question. I think when you did watch Evans, or what he was used to last season, I think we've talked about him as a secondary distributor. Looking at, they had a wing that was really their primary distributor. But for Evans, he handled the ball. He brought the ball up the court. Colorado State's offense, it was just once he got it past half court, he's given it up. Now they're getting into their different actions, right? Versus maybe more the traditional point guard set. So I think this goes to probably a larger question of how is UNC going to utilize Evans outside of what you would traditionally think of a point guard, especially when you're trying to compensate for a shooting guard that has not proven he can shoot from the outside, and some other players that are questionable. So his current assist rate, 20%, solid. There are teams, Arizona, old UNC teams that didn't really have passing and assist ratings higher than that. So to me, it's more of how will UNC put him and the team in the best fit. And to me, a lot of that is what we've talked about consistently over the years is off-ball movement, moving the ball quickly, decisiveness. And once again, if he is giving the ball up, now all of a sudden you have a elite 40-45% shooter that is a target from behind the 3-point line as you're involving the other teammate. So I think he'll still be a secondary distributor. that is one of the main questions, one of my main questions around how can you create easier shots for others. And I think really what I would love to see is using Vasar more as that primary distributor, which we can get into in a little bit. But I think with Evans, once again, he handled the ball. He brought the ball up the court like a point guard does. Just Colorado State, you're giving it up pretty quickly, and now there's 4 or 5 passes going on in those first 10 seconds. So a very different system than what UNC ran. And I think there's just going to be you're going to have to cater to people's strengths. So you can still be a lead guard, just in a little bit of a different sense for next season.
So let's kind of dig that a little bit farther. I did have a question from someone on the message board thread, if I can find it. Oh yeah, from Carolina Blue Blood. What changes to offensive and defensive philosophies and styles, if any, are expected to best fit the current roster? So Sean, just stick with the offensive piece right there and kind of follow up what you were saying about how you think North Carolina might try to use Evans, but then also the potential for Vasar to be somewhat of a facilitator as well.
So, we don't know the exact budgets, right? But there's obviously a focus on Vasar and getting him, and probably a pretty penny to get him. So in my opinion, you're running the offense through him. He is, I was listening to kind of a coaching series last night from the current Grizzlies coach, Tomas Isalo, who is, in my mind, a genius and one of the best coaches there is out there. And he was talking about looking at 3 different bigs: your traditional big, a stretch big, and then the skilled big. And Vasar, in my mind, fits into that, even though he can stretch it a little bit, more that skilled big. His assist rate was only in the 11-12%, so nothing, a little bit lower than the Florida bigs. Obviously a lot less than Cooper Flagg, but he's smart, he's talented. He gives UNC something they didn't have last year, where you couldn't hit Vidal Lubin or Washington in the short roll. You had to hit them as they were going straight to the basket and one dribble shot. So now you can run the pick and roll. You get it into his hands a lot quicker from that 3-point line or just inside the 3-point line. He's able to shoot it. He's able to make a decision on a cutter. He's able to take a dribble or two and then kick it out to a Powell or Evans on the wings. And now you're solving a little bit for that distributor problem. You're putting it in the most talented player's hands. And even though he is a center and not what you traditionally think of a center, you're focusing on your most skilled player and letting him control the game, which he's shown, once again, from that, I think, European background and that technical perspective. But also last year at Arizona, he wasn't posting up. He was catching the ball on the move. He was catching the ball for lobs. He was shooting. So he was always in movement in space. And I, in my opinion, that should be a top priority of utilizing him as that primary decision maker or hub that people are playing off of. So that'd be the main thing. And then just a few secondary things would be, looking to get Trimble and Wilson more in motion. So another thing, as I've been trying to pick up more of the current terminology, such as Sherelle's favorite, the blind pig, but from a stampede action where, say, Evans is on the right side of the court, and if he goes hard left for a dribble, draws in that help defender, you have Wilson catching it on the move from that left wing, left arc perspective. So all of a sudden you're giving him space, but he's not catching it in a 3-point, in a triple threat position. Defender's catching up. Maybe he shoots it, maybe he's not. We know that's not his strong suit. But now you're getting your starting 4 and a talented player in space and in movement. So it just goes back to, in my mind, movement, having hopefully a strong IQ team that can have that focus that I think this year's team lacked across the board. And from that, being able to just move the ball quicker and your actions are dictating what's happening defensively.
I mean, you had me and Vasar at the short roll. I was good at that point. You could have just wrapped it then. Sherelle, where are you? You just gonna make a pig joke at Sean, or where were you gonna go with this?
No pig joke. I think this year more than ever, it's about accentuating the particular skills of each individual player, and how that meshes into the collective is a huge question mark for Hubert Davis and the staff. For example, like I think Trimble you have to get him kind of going downhill. You don't want to necessarily run the same plays for Evans that you would for Trimble. So how do you use Vasar and Wilson and their size? And I think Wilson is a pretty good passer as well. So how do you use their abilities to help Trimble? By the same token, how do you use Trimble's abilities, which we know athleticism, drive, straight line drives, crashing the boards? How do you use that to help Evans? And how do you use, if Drake is on the team, how do you use his ability to help Vasar? So I think that's kind of how it has to happen next year for this to be a good team. Because I think last year or this past season, it was a lot of like let Sean Moran cook, let Joey Powell go do him. And that's fine when you have the talent to do that. But often it can bog down. And if that one person is not cooking or if that one person is not able to do him, then, stuff can bog down. And I think it's going to have to be a collective. It's going to have to look a lot more like the 2023, 2024 season than last year from an offensive perspective. So maybe that means less dribble handoffs. Maybe that means, less pick and roll, more off ball motion. Whatever it is, though, it has to be a situation where the skills of Evans and the skills of Trimble, Wilson, Vasar, Jonathan Powell, Drake Powell, if he's on the team, Jaron Stevenson, those have to be accentuated instead of trying to fit them into a system that you might have run, last year or a couple of years ago. You have to develop something new. And that's a huge challenge for every single coach in Division One now because it's so much, year to year. You have a 1 year team. So the summer, I would imagine, will be spent just trying to figure out the best way to get these particular pieces to fit. And if it means a change in kind of how you fundamentally do things, then you have to do it.
All right, Sherelle, you
Sorry.
jumped in there. Well, hang on. Sherelle jumped in there, so I'm going to let him take this question, but Sean, I want you to answer it too. And we also have to keep moving. If you guys keep double answering these questions, we're going to be here until, until Jesus' next crucifixion. All right, so next question, and Sherelle, I'm going to stay with you because you jumped in on that last one. From Strong Chair, where's the 3-point shooting coming from? And then he doubles down on this, and I actually like the logic behind this. If that is a tough question to answer, how big of a problem is that?
I mean, it's probably the outside of facilitation, it's probably the number 2 question I would say from an offensive perspective, in that Trimble was okay on low volume as a sophomore and then not great last year. And Wilson, for all his promise, I think I read somewhere, Sean, I think you had it. He was 28% in EYBL last year, maybe something like that, and maybe 34% in high school. So that doesn't necessarily pretend well to a large or increase in production from the 3. Like he's able to do it, but you just can't expect a freshman to come in. I guess it did happen last year with Drake and Ian, but it seems unlikely for a freshman to come in and shoot at a high percentage. So you're left with Jonathan Powell, who was a pretty, I would say a plus shooter last season at West Virginia, and then Vasar to some degree. And then Stevenson was at 31%. So somebody's going to have to take a leap is the answer to the question. I'm not sure exactly who it is, but Evans is going to have to not have the kind of UNC tax, the shooting tax that seems to happen when guys come to Carolina. He's going to have to pretty much do what he's done. And either Trimble or Stevenson or Powell, somebody's going to have to step up. Because I think you can get by with 2 shooters, especially if you're going to be strong in the post and strong on the offensive glass. But if you're not, then you probably need 3. And that's going to be tough to find 3 on this roster. If Drake comes back, then perhaps it's easier. He did shoot 37, 38%, but he was 4th, maybe 5th on the scouting report from an offensive perspective last year. So how will he do being higher on the depth chart? So to answer the question, yes, it is a huge concern. And outside of Evans, you're kind of hoping, I would say Evans and Powell. Outside of Evans and Jonathan Powell, you're kind of hoping that someone takes a leap and is able to shoot a decent percentage.
All right, Sean, question for you, sir. From L_Sordo, does Van Allen Lubin fit better next to Vasar, Stevenson, both, or neither?
I would say Stevenson, just because then you're playing him at the 4 and Lubin at the 5, which I think is realistically where you'd want those two in more natural positions versus trying to put Lubin as the 4, depending on depending on matchups. But I think that is going to be the challenge throughout the year, is that you have this glut at that traditional 4 or 5 spot. And there's already been a lot of discussion of Stevenson playing the 3 offensively, defensively, and, talk about potentially if High comes back, et cetera. So would love to see Stevenson at the 4, Lubin at the 5, coming off the bench. Once again, Vesar minutes were trending up into the high 20s, 30s, but he's going to be need to be spelled. Perhaps there are situations where you're playing off of them, especially what we just talked about from Vesar and his talent, a little bit of a high-low, which I think can be utilized for him and whoever he's paired with, Wilson, Stevenson, Lubin, etc., to be able to take advantage of some of those mismatches and get those 4s or 4-5s, easier looks down low, especially if the guards are switching onto them.
Sherelle, this one's going to be for you. From Joey Powell, how big of a deal is it that Johnny T-Shirt stayed in Chapel Hill?
It's a huge deal. It's a 5-star commitment. It's Carolina has been trying to get these one and done talents, and one of the things Hubert Davis has always said is that he wants people who unpack their bags, and kind of immerse themselves in the culture in Chapel Hill, and everything that is Carolina. And Johnny T-Shirt came around more than 30 years ago, and it was a one and done talent, and it decided to stay, and it's still there.
Isn't that crazy? Like
It's crazy.
You see a talented outfit like that, like Johnny T-Shirt, locally owned, alumni operated, right there on East Franklin Street in Chapel Hill, and they have just become part of the fabric. Lots of stores have come and gone on Franklin Street. Not Johnny T-Shirt, still there, still awesome, still giving Inside Carolina subscribers that extra 10% off if they use the promo code found on the message boards. I don't know what else you want from somebody like that. I mean, I want to know at what point they're going to become the 7th number on the front row. Like, at what point is there just a big, JTS on the front row? I think that has to be next, and I will vehemently persuade the folks that are in power, the powers that be, the folks that make those decisions, so that Johnny T-Shirt will get their just due, because we know that they are Hall of Fame caliber in our book. Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com. Visit them if you're in town. Visit them on the web if you're not in town. Either way, you're going to be glad you did. We appreciate them sponsoring this here show. If you're listening to us in the auditory form, there are going to be some ads that run real quick. If you're watching this on YouTube, just hang around. There won't be any ads. You'll still see us. Nothing changes except me saying this right here. Coast to Coast Podcast. I'm Joey Powell for InsideCarolina.com. Sherelle McMillan, Sean Moran are joining me. We're going through your questions, your queries, the things that are on your mind around North Carolina now that the transfer portal has come almost to a close, and North Carolina seems to be kind of stepping back for a little bit and kind of waiting to see what happens next. Sean Moran, for you, sir, from LNGPM, who is the leader, in all caps, of this team as we stand today, and of those players, who steps into that role? I don't know why leader and who were in all caps, but they were, so I emphasize them accordingly. But Sean, I feel like there's an obvious answer for that leader, but if you want to give me a leader-elect, that'd be great too.
Sure. Fantastic question. One that hopefully was being asked as they were getting to know these guys and figuring out, given what looked to be a devoid last year and 2 years ago, almost a surplus from the starters and some of the bench players. So the obvious answer that I think you were going for is Seth Trimble, in terms of coming back for his 4th year, having that veteran experience, not having RJ, Cadeau, Ian Jackson around him, being, they put starting shooting guard. So hopefully that leadership responsibility is coming from him, but it needs to be more than one guy, especially given you've seen aspects of it in the past, but maybe you're not going to naturally anoint him the captain of the team just based on from a vocal perspective. I do think Vesar does seem to have some fire in him. And once again, as that big acquisition, a lot of people will be looking towards him. And then, from the other acquisitions, I think it's going to be a little tougher for them to make their voice heard. If anybody, Evans, could potentially do that, playing in that lead guard role. And I could see Dixon to an extent having that calming influence, just given kind of his background playing for Gonzaga and team takeover. But as a freshman off the bench, that can be a little harder. So Trimble has to step up, and Vasar, I think, just from that hungriness and toughness and that edge, can hopefully provide a little bit of a spark. And from a collective group, when they are getting in timeouts and the huddles for free throws, having that all 5 player discussion versus looking disinterested or not really locked in.
I think Trimble, like you said, is an obvious answer. So agreed there. But I would say don't sleep on Caleb Wilson. And it is incredibly hard for a freshman to come in and play well in the ACC, let alone be a leader. But I do think he has shown the qualities in not just how he conducts himself, how he answers questions, but how he acts, but also how he plays. A big part of learning and being a leader as a freshman is kind of realizing that you're not in high school. And I think he has the mindset and he has honestly the humbleness to accept what he is and what he isn't. And that's a big part of winning over a locker room, especially now when you have so many outside influences, the family, the phone, the friends, as Hubert Davis likes to say, and the money. I mean, let's be honest. Let's be pretty candid here. All that stuff can create a combustible mix. And I think Wilson has been working for this for some time. Wherever he went to college, I feel like he was going to be somewhat of a leader because he's conducted himself like a professional for almost 2 years, and the people around him have made sure that he's conducting himself like a professional, and they've trained him like a professional, and he does media like a professional. So I think it is possible for someone like him. Very rare, but I think he's one to look out for as well from a leadership perspective. One, because like I said, he's been trained to do it, but two, he's not going to run from it. He's not going to wait and say, "Well, I'll just back off until these guys are ready." He's going to come in and demand, I think, of others what he demands of himself. Now he's going to learn that what he demands of himself is probably going to have to increase because it's different in college. But I do think he has those qualities that could make him at least a emotional slash verbal leader for the team, if not more than that.
You heard Hubert Davis say a lot last season that his team was too quiet. Just like we've seen in the past, you would think he will probably try to get the jump on that almost in the summer this year and finding some guys who are going to be vocal. And I'm sure, like you said, Sherelle, that conversation happened with Seth Trimble when Seth Trimble was making his decision to return to Chapel Hill. All right, Sherelle, from Chat Mamba, I want to know why some of these top guys don't want to come to UNC when all things are equal and money's not a factor. If North Carolina is offering competitive NIL, what is the reason? And I think there's probably plenty of ways to go here, but I think that's a popular question because a lot of folks, especially North Carolina fan base, and this isn't a knock, North Carolina fan base has been really spoiled in a sense that for most of the fans' lives, they have been incredibly relevant and top of the food chain in college basketball. And there's been some slippage of that recently. And I think a lot of folks are struggling to figure out why would you not want to come to North Carolina? And Sherelle, aside from just saying everybody has different druthers and that money has changed everything, what else do you think might be the reasons that kids just aren't as quick to choose North Carolina as maybe they have been in the past?
Well, money has changed everything, and money is never equal. So let's be clear: money is never equal. The players that North Carolina has signed, they signed them for a reason. Like they love North Carolina. Don't get me wrong, but let's not be naive and think that North Carolina is not at the top of the market, so to speak. Let's put it that way. So the players that they've gotten, I think, see an opportunity at UNC for growth. They see an opportunity to play in different roles than maybe they have in the past. And the players that they didn't get, it's always a combination. And I don't mean to sound redundant, but it's always a combination of salary and role alignment. And, you know, maybe some of the stuff that has happened with a couple of the players over the last couple of years has had an impact. I think the slippage that you talked about, Joey, with I guess 2 seasons, 1 season missing the tournament, 1 season kind of on off the bubble, and then another season directly on the bubble. I think that has impacted maybe who wants to come. And then just college basketball is just more equitable, even. There's more equity than there ever has been in college basketball. I don't need to come to North Carolina to make a whole bunch of money and get a whole bunch of playing time. I can do that elsewhere. There's probably 15 or 20 schools that I can do that with. So North Carolina has slipped some, but I think the rest of college basketball has also caught up. And I know the counter to that is going to be the school down the road and a couple of others. But as we talked about, they're at different levels as a program right now. So it's a little bit of everything. It's the slippage of what UNC has traditionally been. It's that money is never even, and that goes for North Carolina too with the players they've gotten. And it's also, I think, salary and role alignment. So those three things, and then I guess it's speculating. I don't know if this is particularly true, but you could speculate that like players aren't dumb. They kind of see what's going on and where things are trending right now with Hubert Davis and what's happened. So maybe that has shied a few people off, considering what you talked about with Ian Jackson, and they grew up watching players like him. So that could have an impact. I don't know that it's huge, but you can't dismiss that either.
Yeah, and what's funny is, used to be one of the big things that North Carolina had in their back pocket was that they were always on TV, and now everybody's on TV, right? Like you can't, if you miss a game for your team, it's because you just weren't trying really hard. Because every single league is a network. Every single network has multiple ways to watch games. I mean, you can pull up any scrimmage from the Sisters of the Poor right now and probably find it on ESPN the Ocho somewhere. So it's just it's the things are different, but all those things you just laid out, Sherelle, I think do play a part in these questions and these decisions.
And let's not underscore kind of or maybe that's not the right word. Let's give the
Let's
proper
not
credits.
downplay. Yeah.
Let's not downplay. Let's give the proper credit to someone like Henry Vasar. Again, I know that the counting traditional stats don't show much of an impact player, but the eye test and the advanced metrics say like that was an amazing get for UNC. So there still are guys who have or succumb to the allure of Carolina, I guess you could say, but it's just maybe not as often. Instead of three per class, maybe it's 1.5 or two per class. Maybe that is the slippage that you're talking about.
Every now and then I look at sorry Joey, look at the Interbrand brand rankings, and it each year it does, right now it has Apple and Microsoft and Google, and I feel if they were doing it for college basketball teams, UNC would still be in that upper echelon, but you would definitely see that downward trend in terms of the UNC brand compared to maybe where it was, earlier in the 21st century, or even 10 years ago.
Noted. All right, we got a couple more questions left before we get out of here. I don't know how to split this one up, so I'm going to go with you, Sean. I think there's some imagination you can probably apply to this, but from JBL III or JBL the third, I can't really tell. Outside of Wilson, how does the staff view the incoming freshman in terms of impact? If North Carolina does go out and get a non-major transfer to share some guard minutes with Evans off the bench, where does that leave Dennis and Dixon?
Good. Yeah, another good question. I think it goes back to an earlier comment. I think they both bring different things to the table. I think you can look at where they're ranked and how those types of players usually perform as freshmen. But staying on Dixon for a second, I do think from just a steadiness, I think if he is that third guard, I wouldn't be terribly upset about that. I think he will overplay his ranking, just from, once again, that background that he does have, the shooting ability. He's not a true point guard, but he can handle the ball. He's primarily played off ball, but he can't. I'd say label him as a 2-1. So I do have expectations for him of being able to contribute. I think come ACC play that he could establish himself as he's going to be a consistent, maybe 12-minute guy or whatever that may look like, that you can count on in ACC play, whereas a lot of other guys, their minutes are starting to be reduced. We talked a while back about Cannon Catchings, and when UNC was looking at him, and he was a guy who fell off the map as a freshman at BYU. And I do think Dixon will be a steady guy, whether they do add another guard or if they don't. So once again, with how you have Wilson, who is a most likely one and done prospect. If not, then something went wrong, and maybe he's like Ian and in the portal. And then you have the other guys that you're paying money to, and if they're not playing at all, they're not going to be back. And if they are, then there is an opportunity for them to have that second year with a bigger role. And I would be more confident in Dixon being able to carve that out as a freshman.
See, I knew your imagination would come in handy there. All right, guys, two more. We're going to get out of here. Um, Sherelle, there was a lot of questions, as you can imagine, about Drake Powell and where he stands, and is North Carolina planning for something in case Drake goes? Which, yes, they are. I mean, they're not going to come out and tell you what they're doing, but yes, they have a plan. And as Sherelle's alluded to multiple times, North Carolina is operating under the expectation that Drake does not return. So, Sherelle, from Doc Bryan, is there a list of the other guys in the draft who are, quote, at the edge of the return to school mode, which means they might be hemming and hawing over a decision of being taken late in the first, early in the second? Is there guys like that that would make a similar upgrade to North Carolina's roster should Drake stay in the draft? And I think I know the answer, but I think they'd rather hear it from you. So far away, sir.
There could be. I mean, that's the answer. And there's still time for guys to enter the portal. They have until Tuesday, the 22nd, and then they have until the 26th to actually enter the NBA draft. So as long as you are in the portal and as long as you are in the draft, you have until May 26th to come out of the draft, and you're still in the portal, so you can still kind of go through and pick your team. That's what Pete Nance did. That's what Dawson Garcia did. So Carolina took advantage of situations like that. So first, we need to see the complete list of guys who are in the draft and who are in the portal. But I think there is a point where you start talking about diminishing returns and whether it is worth it for UNC to, I would say, spend the necessary money to get a player of that caliber should Drake decide to enter the draft versus standing pat and maybe adding elsewhere, particularly like the backcourt, and then rolling with what they have. So I think there's three scenarios at play, and I don't think any of them. We're not sure whether or not any of them come to fruition, but I think the three scenarios are Drake comes back, they've got their team, they're ready to go. There's a scenario where Drake decides to go pro and they kind of look at the market, see what's out there, and make an offer to a player they think fits. I think the third scenario that people have to begin to accept as a possibility is that they have the players that they want on the team right now, and they're going to look to add depth. That would mean that either Jonathan Powell or Jaron Stevenson would end up being the starting three. I think all three of those scenarios are in play at the moment, and it's just one thing affects the other. If Drake decides to return, then maybe they say they spend whatever they have left and go get a guard. If Drake decides to go pro, you know, who who says there's a player who's better than Jonathan Powell or Jaron Stevenson left at that point? And if there is, we talk about salary and role alignment. That's something you have to consider. And then you have to consider that if both of those happen and Drake Powell goes pro, then maybe Jonathan Powell slots as the three, or Jaron Stevenson starts there, and they still decide to put a little bit of money and add a player, and so Jonathan Powell becomes kind of a full-time three, and they add another player in the backcourt. So there's lots of scenarios still at play, and a lot of it's going to depend on who enters the portal in the next couple of days, who's in the draft, who leaves, what other schools sign, because graduate students can enter the portal, I think, at any time. And there's still going to be some more decommitments because guys are going to see that they're not going to have the role or the salary that they expected, and they're going to decommit. I mean, Carolina had a player decommit a couple years ago in June, the week before they were supposed to report to campus. They had a player decommit, so that kind of stuff happens, and they're just going to keep their eyes open and move forward. So any three of those scenarios, I think, if it gets to June 1st and you say, "Hey, scenario A, B, or C happened," we'd be like, "Oh, that makes sense."
And that said player is now in the portal. Go figure. All right, last question. And Sherelle, this is a bit of a contract question, so I'm gonna let you take it. It should be fairly easy. From Tar Heel, born, bred, dead, 1987. That is a hell of a screen name. For North Carolina's NIL contracts, are any of them performance based, and is the money paid out in lump sum or over time? I think it's a good question. I don't know that we've actually acknowledged that yet. So I would ask you, what color can you give to that?
I want to be careful on this one. It, there's NIL and salary. Again, I call it salary because it's not NIL. It's a salary. Like NIL is you have to do something to get it, whereas most of these guys are just getting salaries. Um, so from what I understand, again, I'm trying to be very, very careful because I don't want to give any bad information. I think they are paid out over the course of time, but some schools, and I don't know if Carolina's doing this or not, some schools are giving what's essentially signing bonuses, where you sign, you get $1 million on day one, and you get your remaining 1 million over the course of the fiscal year. Some schools are doing that, and right now that is within the realms of legality as it comes to salaries and everything. As far as performance, that stuff is not supposed to be in any kind of salary contract. It can't be if Joey Powell averages 20 points a game, his salary goes from 800,000 to 1.5 million. That's not supposed to be there. It shouldn't be there, and it actually could get folks in trouble. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of what we know. And again,
This is so ridiculous. Like
I'm trying to be
we know what it is, and but you
right,
can't be pay for play because the NCAA still wants to put on some airs of propriety.
right, right. I mean, like there's because there are players that frankly, we know of that if it was performance based, they wouldn't have gotten their salaries within the ACC and college basketball in general. You think about the kid from Washington who signed for $2 million last year. Like if that was performance based, he would not have gotten his $2 million. So yeah, they can't be performance based. Carolina does pay out some, from what I understand. Like I don't know if you want to call it signing bonus or whatever. And then there are some iterations of payment. But
Front
besides that,
loaded,
but
front
besides
loaded
that,
payments. So
I'm hesitating because
that's
I
fine.
don't know if all the contracts are the same, but from the ones I've heard of, it is kind of how it works that way.
Well, and that's again until things are collectively bargained, you're going to see this kind of stuff where it's all over the board.
I, sorry, I know we're way over, but that's the other thing that folks don't understand. Until there's collective bargaining, every single restriction on everything is going to be challenged in court, and they're going to lose. So at some point, Sean's going to be like, "I should be able to play 10 years in college. Why can't I?" And
I
because he's
mean,
not,
the
go ahead.
eligibility thing, the 5 year eligibility thing, got struck down or was being heard this week, or got struck down this week, or something like
Yeah,
that. Like
yeah. So
it's on the docket somewhere.
it's only a matter of time, and until someone's
Yeah,
like, I should be able to play for as long as I want and make as much money as I want. You can't restrict me from making money. If you do, it's antitrust, and all
and
this
that player's name
legalese.
is Perry Ellis. My bad.
so
Sorry.
so that's the thing people have to realize. This is not going away until they are employees and there's collective bargaining. Anything short of that is just going to be a small step. But until that happens, it, this is how it's going to be.
And I
Unless
would,
unless unless Congress or legislators come in and give the NCAA trust exemption, that could be a big deal. And the House settlement, if it's ever approved, will give some guardrails, but it's just going to be chipping away at
yeah.
amateurism, at every single facet of amateurism until it's collective bargaining.
And I would say to everybody listening to this show, if you don't like the way things are going, you should want a collective bargaining situation to develop sooner rather than later. It won't cure all the ills, but it will get things a little back in the barn. We'll make things a little more palatable, I think. And when Sherelle was mentioning players that may drop out of the draft and enter the portal, just in case folks are thinking, I mean, some of those guys are going to come in multiple millions of dollars for 1 year of basketball, which is more than a late first round player usually gets, or a second round player usually gets. And don't quote me because I don't have that in front of me, but it's right around the same amount of money. So that's something to think about, guys. This has been fun. Thank you to everybody who submitted questions. If we didn't get to yours, again, take it up with Sean. He's probably he probably doesn't like you. But we are grateful for all the folks that submitted their questions. We appreciate everybody who listens to us. If you have not lately, subscribe, rate, review. All those things really help us. They really help all of Aussie's podcasts look better in the eyes of potential national advertisers. And that's It's what keeps us at the top of algorithms and what allows us to keep doing these things for y'all for free. So we appreciate all of you listening. Appreciate you making us part of your news and basketball discussion consumption habits. And I'll wrap it on that. Fellas, we appreciate it. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt for sponsoring. Shout out to John Siegley for producing. To Sherelle McMillan and Sean Moran for bringing all of that y'all want to hear and then some. But until next time for Inside Carolina and the Coast to Coast podcast, I am Joey Powell. We will talk to you very, very soon. Y'all be good.